Good morning and welcome to the Coaches Show. The area teams all in action last night. Let's give you some basketball scores before we head on down the road with our show today. First of all, the Jefferson City Jays playing in a tournament in Joplin. Second night last night in overtime. They defeat William Chrisman by a score of 80-71. Kamari Bolton with 28 points to lead the Jays. They'll take on Webb City in the consolation final at 12:30 today. Again, that is in Joplin. The Jays will head into that basketball game with a mark of 8-4. Lady Jays won again last night on the road. They beat Notre Dame de Sion 40-39 to move to 11-3 on the season. Megan Foster with 20, Nicole Martin with 14 for the Lady Jays. Lady Crusaders won last night at the Rankers Fieldhouse as they defeated Moberly by a score of 65-39. Ashley Rehagen with 23 points for the Lady Crusaders as they move to 8-4 on the season. Elias Crusaders won last night as well as it was the doubleheader over at the Rankers Fieldhouse. They beat Moberly by a score of 64-43. Sam Houston with 24 points. The Crusaders in that basketball game led by 28 at the half in the game broadcast right here on KWOS. In the first half, they were 7 of 15 from the three-point arc. They ended up knocking down 9 threes in the basketball game, 5 from Sam Houston, 4 from Weston Porter. Crusaders moved to 8-4 on the season. And then down at Eldon last night, they moved the finals of the Tri-County Conference Tournament to last night. We're supposed to play it today, but because of the weather and the potential weather, they moved that up to last night. And a late start in the championship game between the Blair Oaks Falcons and Southern Boone wins to remain undefeated on the season. They win it 75-68. The Eagles led at the end of all 4 quarters. 5 players in double figures last night for Ryan Fix Ball Club. Jason Rankers had 17, C.J. Clauser with 14, Owen Lubring 13, Cody Alexander with 11, Tim Fick with 10. The Falcons now 8-3 on the season. And wrestling last night over at the Fleming Fieldhouse, the Jays won duels over Ozark and Nixa. The win over Nixa, their 38th straight duel victory. Elias losing in duels to Ozark and Nixa last night over at the Fleming Fieldhouse. Mention the Fleming Fieldhouse, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We have in the studio with us Steve Duncan, who is chairman of the Holiday Hoop Showcase, and part of the Holiday Hoop Showcase, of course, is the Grade 8 Classic, and we're going to kind of put the finishing touches on the tournament that just transpired a couple of weeks ago. And we're also going to talk about the Fleming Fieldhouse as it starts its second half century. And in the studio with us today is former Jefferson City Jays head basketball coach David Fox, and on the phone from down at the lake, former Jefferson City Jays head basketball coach Jim Byland. We're going to talk about the Fleming Fieldhouse in just a moment. Let's put the finishing touches on the Grade 8 Classic. Steve, first of all, attendance, best ever?
Oh, hands down, Kevin, the best attendance we've ever had. Great for the tournament. Unfortunate probably for a few fans on that last night. We actually had to turn some people away. Fleming Fieldhouse was at its capacity, perhaps almost exceeding capacity. It was a tremendous crowd. It's a great problem to have. I wish we had a way to shoehorn a few more people in there, but no, hands down, best tournament. We've got a meeting scheduled January 22nd. We always kind of have a wrap up, but the comments we're getting back have been tremendous. Getting good letters and emails back from the participating coaches. Most of the teams have requested come back. We've got some new teams that have asked to come into the tournament field next year. So, we just need to tweak a few things and continue to improve each year.
A 3 by Michael Porter with 2.5 seconds left to go in the basketball game. Breaks a 51 all tie. And Father Tolton wins 54-51. And taking a look at the program before I came over here this morning, Michael Porter now the all-time leading scorer in the Grade 8 Classic.
Isn't that amazing? And Tolton's just been in the tournament for 2 years. Yeah. It's he's quite a player, quite an attraction, and quite honestly, that's one of the reasons we had such good crowds. And Elias played a tremendous game. That was just a great basketball game to sit and watch, or stand and watch for some of us.
And David, before Michael Porter took over, Matt Miller, who was the all-time scorer in the Grade 8 Classic.
Yeah, and first, thanks for having us in. Sounds like Jefferson City had a great night across the board last night in all the sports, which is great to see. And hopefully you can get me home today after these snow showers are going on. So, absolutely, great conversation this morning about a great facility in Fleming Fieldhouse. And you mentioned Matt Miller, who's a client. Had lunch with him Tuesday of last week, oddly enough, and brought up the conversation about him still at that time being the record holder prior to the tournament. And then I didn't know the stat that you just gave, that Michael Porter has exceeded Matt Miller, who played for Springfield Parkview back in the day, was a great player in his own right. One
of the things, and what we're going to talk about for most of the show today, is the fact that when you get to the Grade 8 Classic, it's really great because you get a chance to see former players that come back. I mean, Justin Smith was there. Of course, Jefferson City J, basketball player, football player, went to Mizzou, played in the NFL, and a lot of people think he'll be a Hall of Famer someday. He was there. You can go down the list, but number Hall of Fame basketball coaches in the facility: Jerry Bisher, David Fox, Jim Byland. At one point in time, you looked over the far side, a couple of rows up from one of the benches, Rich Maloney, Jim Byland, David Fox, all sitting together, and I'll bet you they were talking basketball.
There's no doubt.
And I mention that because discussion during the week of the tournament, and we started talking about the Fleming Fieldhouse and the 25th Grade 8 Classic. And Steve Newman, we want to thank him because he came across the first Capital City Tournament program, which was mid-January in 1965, and a guard by the name of Jim Byland played in that tournament from Moberly. Another player on that tournament was John Thompson, who is a junior that year, who both of them ended up not only playing in the Fleming Fieldhouse, but coaching in the Fleming Fieldhouse as well. And so we wanted to spend some time, because I'll be honest with you, my first encounter with the Fleming Fieldhouse was in 1978. Came in and did a Fulton basketball game and walked into the gym. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it is just today. It's a great facility today as it was 50-plus years ago. I mean, we go around the state in basketball gyms, and you guys go all over the state, and I'd say the Fleming Fieldhouse ranks, if not the top, one of the top still today.
Well, Kevin, it's the design. You know, it's a classic basketball gym. You've got the bleachers on the lower level. You've got the balconies on three sides. You've got the big stage on one end. And the biggest thing, as far as we're concerned, is just the seating capacity. I mean, you know, it's 3,000, 3,100 people, and you know, there's just not a facility anywhere in central Missouri, you know, that can accommodate a crowd that size. And yeah, the floor has been redone. The new scoreboards, the school's done a great job of maintaining it. You know, you go out in the lobby and there's the smell of popcorn. People are sitting around talking. Yeah, it's just a great basketball venue.
As we mentioned, the Grade 8 Classic took over for the Capital City Tournament. The first Capital City Tournament was January the 14th, 15th, and 16th back in 1965. And although the gym may not have been brand new, it's real close, because we were trying to figure that out during the week. So we're figuring around 64, 65 time frame is when the Fleming Fieldhouse, at that point in time, actually was the senior high school Fieldhouse. And the Capital City Tournament then turned into the Grade 8 Classic in 1991. Let's go to 65 again. Moberly came in and played in that. Jim Byland, looking at it last night, I think there were 7 teams that came in, and Moberly was one of those, and you were on that squad, weren't you?
Right. I didn't know there were 7 teams. I just knew of our side of the bracket. I was a kid, and I do remember the weather was bad, which kind of plagued the tournament through its early years anyway. But opening night we played Helias. I remember it was an overtime game. A lot of my memories of that game were seeing John Staggers in front of me and then disappear up or around, and I think he scored 30-some that night, and I got 15 by, I think I've got a newspaper clip from the Moberly paper on it. I should have found that before tonight, but we actually won the game in overtime, and I got an assist on the winning basket, but that was the only game we won all week. We got beat later by Union, Missouri, with a guy that would later be a teammate of mine named Irvin Pyrek playing, and then Bowling Green beat us in the third-place game. So what went on the other side of the bracket, I don't know, because it was a snowy time. We didn't stay for hardly any games other than the ones we played. We got home, and I remember that first night. It was probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Let's talk about John Staggers for just a moment, because I remember coming to Jefferson City in the late 70s, and the first time over to Helias, you look on their record books, and John Staggers' name on a lot of the record books over there, not only in basketball but in football as well. Played 6 seasons in the NFL with the Steelers, the Green Bay Packers, and the Detroit Lions. Of course, left Helias and went to the University of Missouri, played football there. An exceptional athlete, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. He was really quick, sideways and up and down. I only got to play him that night, too, but at that time, Helias and Moberly were in the same conference, North Central Conference, with Fulton, Kemper, and Boonville. So we played him 3 or 4 times that year. Actually got to introduce him to Coach Atkins down at the Hall of Fame introductions a couple years ago when Chris Carpenter went in. John was sitting there when his college football team went in. He said even though he lived in this town, he'd never met Coach Atkins.
Wow. John Thompson played on that basketball team with you that came in '65 and played in the Capital City Tournament. And, of course, that is the father of Blair Thompson, who's the current Jefferson City Jays head basketball coach. And, of course, John Thompson, Hall of Fame coach as well. And we remember him mostly for playing, coaching the Jefferson City Lady Jays that made it to a number of Final Fours.
Yeah, I moved to Moberly when I was a junior in high school, and John was in a grade behind me. Although we were the same age, I was young for the grade that I was in, and we played together. That year, John was on the JV the first year I was there, and we played together that year. John, as a player, was a really good shooter. He was a guard, he was a good-sized guard for his time. The thing that held him back as a player, he was extremely slow-footed. I can remember Blair as a shooter. I watched him play a couple times when he was in high school. But John was a terrific guy. He actually got to Jeff City. He was in and out of coaching through his lifetime, and one of the times he wanted to get back into coaching was when I was there as head coach, and he called me and said, "You got any openings on your staff?" And we had, I think, an 8th grade job at the time or something like that. Gail Jones was moving. And I said to him, "All right, John, we have some jobs, but you're overqualified for them." And he said, "Well, I'll come down and interview anyway if you would get me an interview." And I said, "Sure." And he went into an interview with Richard Pemberton at the time, and interviewing for an assistant job on the boys team, came out as a head girls basketball coach. The rest is history.
We'll continue our discussion on The Coaches Show, brought to you by the Auto Shop after this timeout. Welcome back to The Coaches Show. Continuing our discussion with regards to the Fleming Fieldhouse, as we mentioned at the top of our show, it's starting its second half century as far as basketball here in the capital city. And, of course, the Capital City Tournament, the first ever, was back in 1965. And, of course, that went from the Capital City Tournament to the Grade 8 Classic, which started in 1991. David Fox in the studio, along with Steve Duncan on the phone with us from the lake, is Jim Byland. And Jim, first of all, let's talk about your impressions when you first stepped into the gym as a basketball player and then as a head basketball coach at Jefferson City.
Well, it was as nice a place as I'd ever played in. When we moved to Moberly, it was a big gym there. We played on the same court as a junior college and saw some places I hadn't seen. I actually had played at Northeast Missouri State in a sectional game when we'd won a regional, and when I was a sophomore in high school. But most of the gyms I grew up playing in, a lot of them you would put your leg out to keep from hitting the wall when you were shooting a layup, and some of the over and back lines intersected with the free throw line on the opposite end of the court, so when you hit the ceiling with your shot. So that was quite a journey for me, but I remember how bright it was, how big the floor was, and I was pretty impressed with it, I'll tell you that. I was impressed the other night when I was there, too, with the floor and the scoreboard and everything they've done. They've really improved it a lot. When I first went there in 1972 as an assistant to Coach Maloney, the false ceiling wasn't there. You could actually see the girders, steel girders. And this time of year, they'd shut off the heat to the gym over Christmas to save money, and it was kind of cold in there. You could see your breath when you were practicing.
You told me that story yesterday. I knew we were going to hear that story today.
Yeah, it was. Guys would come to when they were practicing. They'd have on sweatshirts and gloves and stocking caps trying to play basketball.
Well, everybody's got it pretty easy today these days, don't they, Coach?
Yeah, and you remember Coach Maloney practiced for a long time too, so it wasn't a quick in and out. Sometimes we show up at 9 in the morning and leave at 2 in the afternoon.
David, you played for Columbia Rockbridge, so you played in the gym and also coached in the gym as well.
I actually never did have an opportunity to play
Really?
in Fleming Fieldhouse. We played Jeff City, first time ever in 1979.
Hey, Dave, who won that game?
Like I said, we played Jeff City in 1979. Now I can say the good guys across the river won. And it wasn't close. We were introduced to a young man by the name of Don Horde and a great supporting cast, Kurt Schleter and several other guys. And it's kind of the Rockbridge's coming out party that year. It's the first time that we kind of started playing some of the bigger schools. Of course, when Rockbridge was built back in the mid-'70s, we played a smaller conference, in a smaller conference, and a lot of smaller schools. And but we thought we were something in January that year, and found out that we weren't. So that was my first experience playing against the Jays, and certainly I'm going to go back to the floor a little bit and talk about the vision and also the vision of Jim Byland, because I know we'll talk about this a little bit. There's no surprise when this was built. The folks at Jeff City High School and the expectations were to build the best, the biggest, and the best. And I think that's a perfect example of the Fleming Fieldhouse. I know when I came to Jeff City, very few high schools had the collegiate-sized floor. A huge difference. And Coach can remember the many gyms we played in the smaller floors and what have you, and the advantages. And it was one of the uniqueness things about the Fieldhouse. And no surprise, back at that time, it was going to be the biggest and the best, and it was at that point in time, and as we're talking today, it still is one of the best.
And I know when you were head basketball coach, you made some tweaking as far as the floor was concerned, didn't you?
Well, yeah, me directly, absolutely not. But
yeah.
Certainly the school district did, and we took up the original floor back in the early 2000s and replaced it. And some folks may recognize, but we took the jump center circle, and that's mounted on the stage end of Jeff City High School. So the original part of the original floor still exists in Fleming Fieldhouse, and that's kind of cool. But yeah, exactly. And it was quite a neat process to see from start to finish.
David, when you take a look at it in terms of seating, is it still one of the biggest high school gyms in the state?
I think so. I think that 3,000 number is kind of maybe normal now with new facilities being built. I think the other thing, Fleming Fieldhouse is a basketball-specific field house.
Right.
You look at a lot of the new gyms today, they have stages, they have other things, because there's so many different other activities that go on in their facilities. So, seating's tremendous. Certainly Steve talked about the lower bowl and the upper bowl, which are unique. It's just a great place to play, and always has been and always will be.
Steve, we have about 45 seconds before we go to the break at the bottom of the hour. There were some changes that we all got a chance to see at the Grade 8 Classic as far as the floor is concerned, and scoreboards as well.
Oh yeah, the new scoreboards just went up this year. The floor's been painted, and obviously the 3-point area is all the same color. It's much easier to determine if a shooter's behind the 3-point line or inside the 3-point line. It was all done to aesthetically make it just that much more attractive for the fans.
When we come back in the second half hour, we're going to kind of pick these guys' brains, if you will, and take a look at some of the great games and some great players that have come in and played at the Fleming Fieldhouse. You're listening to The Coaches Show, brought to you by the Auto Shop. We are back with more on KWOS after the break. Welcome back to The Coaches Show. We are joined from the lake by Jim Byland. Here in the studio, we have David Fox along with Steve Duncan talking about the Fleming Fieldhouse as it embarks on its second half century as far as basketball is concerned. And we were talking about the first ever Capital City basketball tournament mid-January back in 1965. And at that point in time, it was called the Senior High School Fieldhouse. It later became the Fleming Fieldhouse. And let's spend a moment, Jim Byland, and talk about who it is named after, Marvin Fleming.
Well, he was one of the better administrators, or maybe the best administrator I was ever around, and I had good fortune working for a lot of them. But I think if you trace the roots of the athletic quality or the athletic programs at Jeff City High School, you can trace them back to Marvin Fleming and Pete Adkins for the standards that they set. So he was a demanding guy. He was loved his sports. He would go to every game, football and basketball and everything he could get to, and he was sorely missed when he was gone. I heard you guys talking a little bit at the break. I was sitting in the coach's, actually it was Norm Stewart's coach's clinic in Columbia, and Dave Fox told me that he had died. He was in good health. We were all shocked by it at the time.
David, some remembrances of Marvin Fleming from you.
Yeah, and they were brief in my career. I think when I came in, 1986, I don't know this to be a fact, but I may have been one of the last people that Mr. Fleming hired when I got on board in June of '86. He was certainly the principal at that time, and was unfortunately. Started the school year, and we lost him shortly after that. But I do remember sitting next to Jim Byland as well, and I thought it was certainly fitting to Mr. Fleming that, Coach, correct me if I'm wrong, but the memorial service was in the Fieldhouse, and certainly the Fieldhouse that's named after him today. So although I didn't know Mr. Fleming a long time, but certainly what he has established, as Jim said, the standards and what have you, the expectations were very significant.
One of the things, too, we want to add is that when you come into the gym, there are a number of things in the gym in cases of things related to sports at Jefferson City High School, isn't there?
And there's not enough room for all of them, and that's a great point, Kevin. We travel across the state and the country, and you see a lot of conference banners and district plaques, and you go into Fleming Fieldhouse and you look at the banner row, and correct, and those are state championships. Mm-hmm. And I think that sets a precedence and separated Jeff City High School from other schools because the excellence and the expectations that JC had.
And I think sometimes you have a situation where you say, this is the best, and you may get a discussion, you may get an argument from someone else, but when you take a look at it, 64, 65 time frame when this gym was built, the best in the state at that time, and it may be one of the best in the state today.
Yeah, Jim, pipe in on that. I don't know of a better facility, quite honestly. And again, Coach Byland, one of the things that I admire about him and his vision, we played in a lot of great, big, large schools. Mm-hmm. Certainly when I came to Jeff City in '86 and continued through on and still do today. And, Coach, I can't remember another facility, high school facility like Fleming Fieldhouse that I ever coached in. Can you?
The closest one I can think of for seating might be Parkview. And it's
right.
A different configuration, so I'm not sure how many they seat because those bleachers are one piece on each side, and they push all the way back so they can have PE classes in there. And I can't think of any others that big, and nothing even close, actually.
All right, again, the facility goes back to the mid-'60s. We need to talk about it. Teams that have come in, games. When you take a look at it, and I'm going to throw out the one because people ask me, what's the best game you've ever seen? And I say, well, I'll tell you what. The night that Jihadi White, Lauren Woods, and Chris Carrawell came in from St. Louis Cardinal Ritter and took on the Jefferson City Jays with Monty Harge and company, David, today that still may be the largest crowd ever to watch a basketball game. And again, Jihadi White, Lauren Woods, Chris Carrawell, all went Division I college basketball. Carrawell and Woods went to the ACC. I think one went to Duke, one went to Wake Forest. Jihadi White went to Georgetown. Jihadi White then played in the NBA. That was a tremendous atmosphere and a tremendous basketball game.
I agree with everything you just said, absolutely. And people asked me, and I certainly was at the grade 8 this year, and that to me is the largest. I don't know how you can measure it from what we had, the last couple of weeks. But not only that, but I'll never forget the loudest moment that I can ever remember in Fleming Fieldhouse is the second possession. We call an isolation for Monty. Jihadi White's guarding him down on the left block, and Monty gives him a little shake and bake and dunks on him. Mm-hmm. And a moment in J basketball history. But also come back, these are visions of Jim Byland. That game was scheduled by Coach. We wanted to play the best in preparation to get where we want to get. Certainly won a state championship the year before, and those are things that again, Coach that did, and those opportunities were created by Jim, and they wouldn't have happened, I don't think, without that vision that he had playing some of those big time talents and teams.
Jim, some great games, rivalry games against Columbia Hickman at the Fleming Fieldhouse over the years. You take a look at it. What stands out the most for you? A game, maybe a couple of games?
Well, when I was assistant to Coach Maloney, the one I remember is when DeSmet came in with Steve Stepanovich.
Right.
And we were pretty good at that time, too. And place was packed. I remember Norm Stewart brought over a bunch of boosters from Columbia because they were recruiting Stepanovich, and that wasn't taken real well with us letting them in free to watch that game and them cheering for DeSmet instead of us. But coaching-wise, the game I remember is the first year I was there, and I wasn't at the game you were talking about with Cardinal Ritter. But the district championship, first year I was the head coach, we were playing Hickman. And we had split the two scheduled games during the year, and we got ahead early. They caught us. They went ahead, I think, by 14 points starting the fourth quarter, and we came back and beat them. And that fourth quarter, I've got the video of it. It's not great quality because it was a tape and black and white, but the camera is actually shaking in the fourth quarter on concrete, which is a scary thought. But we came back and won the game at the end and won our first district championship. We'd won quite a while, and that was the loudest I heard it.
You know, and I think at the end of that game, John McGuire, who was doing the broadcast, I don't think had a voice left at the end of that game. That was year two that you guys came out of the gate and won a whole bunch of games in a row, didn't you?
Yeah, I forget the exact number, but starting out, we won our first 13 or 14 games. The schedule was a little softer then than what they play now, but because there were a lot of 3A schools on, and we were a 4A school at the time. But that game, and I wasn't at the first place game the other night or championship game the other night, but there were people standing everywhere, 3 or 4 deep on the stage and all the way around the floor, kneeling. And I remember when we would make a basket and score a point, you'd almost have to cover your ears. It was so loud.
David, I know I took away the Cardinal Ritter because you and I have talked about that several times.
Sure.
How about some other games that come to mind for you?
There's so many. Kind of like Coach, I can't remember. I can tell you some great individual performances. Anthony Peeler, back in the day. I think he may have been a sophomore, just had a phenomenal game. And you know, Jeff City Jays, over the course of the years, had some great players as well. You know, Enoch Roberts, Derek Johnson. You know, I don't want to exclude anybody, but several great players back in the day as well. So not so much a single game or a single individual, but you know, if you came to a game at Jeff City, you know, there's a pretty good chance it was going to be competitive, and you're going to see some very high-level basketball, and I think that's what I take away more than anything. Yeah,
you mentioned Enoch Robertson. He was one that could shoot the three when they just brought the three into high school basketball.
The American dream, yeah, man. And, you know, it's funny you should mention that. You alluded to this earlier about alumni coming back for the holiday tournament, and always, I don't know about Coach, always got, where's Enoch? What's Enoch up to, and what have you, and it's great to hear, and that's right, I believe 88's when the three-point line came in, and actually he was very effective from it.
One game, and I don't remember who the Jays played, but I remember the clock was running down late in the third quarter. Enoch Roberts had the basketball, and he's backing in, and he's going over to the hash mark on the left side. His back is to the basket. He's looking at the clock with about 2 seconds left. He pulls the dribble up, turns around in the air, and knocks down a three that does nothing but hit the bottom.
I'm not surprised by that at all. You know, he was that type of player, and Coach can allude to this also. You know, go back to Vashon, I believe in 88, Coach, he's probably, a fingernail away from a deflection in the semifinal games, you know, at the Hearn Center for an opportunity to play for a state championship. And, boy, he's a great talent.
Jim Byland, how about the year that Vashon came in and played in the Capital City Tournament? They had a young man by the name of Anthony Bonner, who was a great player.
Yeah, and I was telling you yesterday that was a game when the motion offense wasn't very effective. The best we could get was an off-balance 20-footer, but yeah, and it cost us a lot of money to get them in there, but it was well worth it. I think they beat us by 30 that night. Another guy that played in there, I was thinking about a minute ago, was named Gary Anderson from Columbia Hickman that played for the Chargers, ran back kicks for the Chargers. He was one of the best athletes I ever saw. He was phenomenal. And that's when you talked about Don Horde a minute ago. We had Don Horde. They went at it, and there wasn't a breath's worth of difference between the two of them.
Yeah, there was another player on that Hickman team along with Gary Anderson. You mentioned it the other day.
Well, these guys were ahead of it. The first year I was an assistant to Coach Maloney, the Hickman team that was in there had Leo Lewis,
right,
that played for the Steelers. They had a guy named Ellis that was running back for the Packers.
Gary Ellis, yeah.
They had a guy named Cruz that was played football at Notre Dame. Stewart that was a All-Big 8 pitcher from Mizzou, all on one basketball team. And we weren't real talented that year, so playing Hickman at that point wasn't a whole lot of fun. But fans always did come out for Hickman.
And Gary Anderson was during the time frame where there weren't a lot of players that could dunk the basketball. And that Hickman basketball team that I remember with Anderson on it, they almost all could dunk the basketball.
Yeah, they were very talented.
Hickman always had big kids.
Absolutely. I'm sorry about that. Side note, that team was coached by Ken Ash, who, I just took over for at the Shelby State games. And this is a great conversation. I've had many conversations with Coach Ash the last 3 years about the Hickman-Jeff City rivalries and what have you. And for some reason, the stories aren't exactly the same. It's kind of a different take coming from the Columbia side of things. But
Steve Duncan, grade 8 classic, Ronnie Brewer from Fayetteville High School.
Yeah, I remember that, and just on a personal note, my son Kirk was a sophomore that year and got to guard him a little bit, and may even got dunked on once or twice. But yeah, I sure remember Ronnie Brewer, yeah.
And Jim, these games weren't played at the Fleming Fieldhouse. They were played down in Springfield at the Bass Pro Tournament of Champions. But I still remember those games where you guys took on St. Raymond's out of New York, Christ the King out of New York. Terrence Rencher played against the Jays one year, and a gentleman by the name of Orlando Antiqua played for St. Raymond's. And those were some great basketball games, weren't they?
Yeah, and that was one of the things because you always, it was a time when Midwest basketball was kind of, and communication was getting good enough that you hear stories about people on the East Coast and the West Coast, and they were always thought to be superheroes and Superman kind of things, and it was our first chance to go and play at that level. And what we found was that the difference between a really good player on the East Coast, the West Coast, and in the Midwest was press coverage, because we found we could play with them. There wasn't a whole lot of difference between them and us.
Jim, as we wrap up our conversation here today, number one memory of the Fleming Fieldhouse, what would it be for you?
I think it happens every time I walk in there, because I spent a lot of hours. I was 5 years as assistant and 10 years as a head coach there, so and I watched my family grow there. I remember my kids coming to the games when they were babies, and I was telling Liz the other day when I got back from there, no matter what's going on in my life, as you get older, things change. Walking in there, I've just felt a certain sense of home, peace. It's any place that I've ever been, that's probably the number one place that feels like where I ought to be.
Steve Duncan?
Boy, it would be hard to say anything more profound than what Jim just said. I think all of us that have seen our kids grow up, I can remember when my kids were elementary school and we were getting involved in the J Booster clubs and putting on 5th, 6th, and 7th grade tournaments there. Kids then playing for Jeff City High School there, and now coming back, with grandkids. My granddaughter went to the clinic this year for the first time. I mean, it's just it's kind of a home away from home, as Jim said. He said it better than I can.
David?
Yeah, right on with Jim, but the players, the assistant coaches, Jim was assistant coach at one time, as I was. The fans, at the end of the day, they're the ones that have made it all happen. And there's no question it's a special, special place. And great conversation today.
When you take a look at it, I think, as both of you said, Jim said it best. For those involved in the basketball programs at Jefferson City, the Fleming Fieldhouse is home. Thanks very much for being with us today. Jim Byland down at the lake, David Fox and Steve Duncan here in the studio, and we'll be back with more after the break. You're listening to The Coaches Show, brought to you by the Auto Shop.